And it's interesting that about 20 years ago, a lot of sex therapists used to actually recommend that couples, if they're having problems, to actually go and look at pornography together. 20 years later, fast forward, they're actually saying, no, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And in fact, it'll jeopardize your relationship. This idea of the brain, how it's actually hardwiring, creates this what we call superhighways of the brain. And so much so that it actually is reprogramming constantly. And you need another higher fix to get stimulation. And that's the reason why what starts off with, say, bums and boobs, might be innocent, then progresses to other things, younger age kids, more violent, more debasing, more promiscuous, and more, basically criminal activity. And that's because their dopamine and their serotonin area of their brain needs a higher fix to keep that same level of stimulation, that same level of high, if you like. Like if you had a heroin and you had 1 gram and it gave you a hit, the next time it might have to go to 2 grams. The next time it goes to 3 grams. You see how it progresses? An alcoholic may only get 1 drink, 2 drinks, then it gets to more drinks. Same thing with the area of sexual addiction, is it needs a higher level to get the stimulation, and it gets to a point where self-stimulation is the only way they can actually get stimulated. So even in an intimate relationship, they can't be aroused. In fact, there's a lot of documentation called pornography-induced impotence, and that men are unable to rise to the occasion when they want to. The interesting thing is, and this is a very side issue, is that older men can recover quicker than younger men. Fancy that. Usually it's the other way around in most things, but they're finding that young men have actually got faster too soon, too quickly, and it's caused so much dysfunction. It can come back, but it's going to take a lot of work and discipline. And we're going to come back and talk about this in a little bit more detail. But those images are going to stay in your brain forever. Don't have to have a hold of you, but they can stay in there. And what happens is that young men, particularly if they're using it for research, and young women for that matter, actually look at this pornographic material and actually say, well, if that's what it looks like they're enjoying it on the movies or on the internet, therefore I better do the same. When I've spoken to young people about this, particularly young ladies, it's a very, very powerful tool for them to actually say, it's okay to say no. Now, you might think that young men are the only perpetrators. I'm here to say that young ladies are now becoming much more sexually aggressive than ever before. My eldest son has been propositioned numerous times. In fact, he was actually at a nightclub. It wasn't a nightclub, it was a school function at a nightclub, and he went to a boys' school, and they got together with another girls' school, and they put them all together, and all the girls in the LBDs, the little black dresses, were all dancing around, and he had one girl come up to him, and he was just dancing and having a good time. The music is blaring, it's so loud they can't communicate, so she writes on her phone, sex, ? And then my son gives it back to her and leaves. And he actually wrote male, ! and then left. He didn't want to, do you understand? Some people get it. You got it, good. But that's what he wrote back. And he had a young lady who propositioned him. He's got a girlfriend, and he actually was, some young lady was actually saying to him, I know you've got a girlfriend, but I can do things that your girlfriend can't. And, well, unfortunately, she can't do those things because he's not married, but she was actually saying, she was 16 years of age, and she was just propositioning him to do anything he wanted to do. That's what our young people are involved with, because they've been viewing this stuff, and there's no one's talking about healthy sexuality. And I actually think as leaders of churches, we need to help our young people know how to have healthy sexual relationships. And ideally, in the confines of a loving, committed, covenant relationship in marriage. But we're seeing so many young people who are saying, it's okay, I'm a Christian, but that's what they call sexual atheism, is a new coined phrase. That I'll live all moral parameters, but don't talk to me about my sex life. I'm going to live that. I can live whatever I like. I'll live everything else. I'll go to church, I'll do serving, I'll praise and worship, I'll do all those type of things, but don't ask me to give up my sexual liberation. And that's what's happening with these young people today. And this idea that anything goes. And young people think that that's normal. When they see virtual images on the internet, they're actually saying, well, that's normal. They liked it. Men say, well, they like it hard and they like it fast and they like it violent. And they like it when I abuse them and yell at them and hurt them. And girls thinking, well, I don't really like it, but that's what it looks like they like it on these internet, and therefore I better do it. And this is where this conflict of reality and virtual are just diametrically opposed to one another. And they don't realise because no one's talking about it. Mums and dads aren't talking about it. They've abdicated their responsibility. And we need to start talking. We need to encourage them, motivate them in a sensitive way to actually broach these conversations. Some other images about the addictive nature of pornography is it causes, as I said, these neural pathways within the brain. And again, I hope I don't boring you with this information, but it's just very helpful information nonetheless. And it actually releases different chemicals, the serotonin and the dopamine. But one thing I would have to say is regard women with the release of what we call oxytocin, which is like the hug hormone. When a woman has a baby, it releases all these oxytocin hormones, and that's how they're bonding agent, where they actually release and they just form this bond with a kid. Not everyone, but to a certain degree. Not everyone, but certain. They bond with their child. When a woman has intimacy with a young man, they also release oxytocin. So there's a bonding agent. And males, we also have a degree of oxytocin, not as significant as women, but this bonding agent means that they get attached to whoever they've been intimate with. Whereas guys, if they only got a little bit, they can actually go from anyone and everywhere. It doesn't mean anything to them. It just becomes a physical act. My son, who's in university at the moment, came to me, Dad, and said, Dad, we just live in two different worlds. We're living in Mars compared to what's here on this earth. Our lifestyle is so different. He was speaking to a young man, he slept with 20 different partners. The average age for a young lady to lose their virginity is 15 to 16 years of age. 60% of them actually say that sexting is okay, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Sending images, inappropriate images. We've just normalised. We've actually just made it and cheapened it and made it nasty, where God has actually said, protect your body. And the other thing that we need to do as pastors, and I will say this, is that we can't always say it's bad, bad, wrong, wrong, no, 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 until you get married. Because what it actually does then, and that's the ultimate, I should clarify, yes, wait till they're married, but talk about sexuality in a pure and a great way. Because I had a young lady ring us up just recently, and she was brought up in a very conservative environment and where sex was bad, bad, bad until you get married. So she went into the marriage with this subliminal messages going through. So when she signed the dotted line and could actually do it, she couldn't. Because in her mind, it was always wrong. It was nasty. It was bad. Because no one actually talked about the beauty of sex and the privilege of sex and the purity of sex. And we as church leaders need to start talking about it in a very sensitive way, and I'll talk about that as we go along. This idea that it can change people's moods, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier about this idea of you can pick something up, their mood is changing. Young man that I've been mentoring, I can always tell that something's going on because he became more aggressive. He was a bit short in the sail. He was just sort of like, you could just pick something up in his spirit. And all it take for me was to say, how are you going in that area? He goes, I've fallen again. So let's get back up there again. Let's get back on the horse and live a life of purity. And it's amazing when you ask that same young man how it's going, and he goes, I'm going really well. And he says, and this is as quote, he goes, I feel lighter. We need to be burden lifters. And we need to actually create a safe space for young people to do. I've already said this, pornography changes individual beliefs, and it actually changes what is normal and inappropriate. It just changes out what we think is okay and what's acceptable. This next slide just talks about the impact of pornography, and it predominantly looks at, males, but, females are predominantly the main victims in this, but they can be also this idea of, it's predominantly females that are the victims, and they're the ones that are objectified, but young men and men in general are also victims. We actually see this idea that for men, they only see women as one value for their sexual gratification. And we see this virtual side of things that women like it violent and they like it harsh. I'm not going to go into great detail about what's on there, but I would say, hazard a guess, you could use your imagination. If you could think of the worst thing, then multiply it by 2. That's how bad it is. And it's actually a form of sexual slavery and prostitution, and none of you would agree with that. You see young people, children being used and abused. You may have heard on the news just recently of these situations in India. 2-year-old and a 5-year-old were raped, gang raped. Where has human nature gone? So we've actually lowered sex to become just as simple that someone needed to actually fulfill my sexual desires. And again, it sounds very negative, and I apologize if you're offended with whatever I've said. But this is a reality that young people are seeing, and we need to be upfront as much as possible, and how we need to be well informed about how we deal with these issues. We see that acceptable behaviour and unacceptable behaviour, and almost criminal in its fact. And we also see this aggressive and disrespect to the other gender. And then I've already mentioned this idea that men become incapable of forming natural, biological, healthy relationships and normal intimacy. And it can be really, really important. So my encouragement for you is this idea, is that we need to break this cone of silence. We need to actually start having these conversations. We need to start talking about it in a way that is not threatening. It's a safe place to talk about anything and everything. Tell me about that. Tell me about what those type of things. And then, so I'm going to give you some things that you can do as church leaders about this area of sexual intimacy. I've already mentioned, I think we start talking about sexuality in a very, very upfront and very open way. I actually, and it seems like a strange way to introduce this, but I actually spoke at a school recently. I did a chapel service, and I always ask what has been spoken about for a lot of times, and they can give a whole list. And I said, what hasn't been spoken on? And one of the things that they asked me is, would I consider speaking to young people how to get along with their parents? So I did. I did a whole message on how young people could get on with their parents. It was a topic that no one had ever spoken about. In the whole history of the school, the principal came up to me and said, no one has ever spoken about that, and yet it is so important. It's so important, but no one has spoken about it. The same thing I would say about sex. It is so important, but no one's speaking about it. That's our responsibility as leaders of our congregations, and also in the general community, wherever we may be. I mentioned about the workshops, like Valiant Man would be one. But any time you get a group of men together, I'm actually speaking at a men's breakfast on Saturday. And I'm going to do a sort of a secret men's business, if you like, on healthy relationships. I'm going to talk a little bit about pornography, and I'm also going to talk about work-life balance. And they've got me doing that in 35 minutes, so I'll have to be speaking very quickly. But that type of safe environment, it's amazing how many people come up to me afterwards and say, I'm so glad you're talking about this topic. I'm so glad I can actually tell you. And I've had 70-plus-year-olds saying, I've got a lust issue. It's nearly destroyed my marriage. My wife doesn't want to be with me. And I can just see the tension. I had a woman who's been married 35 years, and she rang me up just the other day, and she was heartbroken. She just discovered her husband had been involved in pornography and looking at inappropriate material. And you could hear her pain. She was such in anguish. Everything that she had known has now been destroyed. Everything that she had perceived, and they were involved in the church, and they had been involved in leadership, and everything like that has now been destroyed simply because her husband couldn't talk about this area. And all it may have needed is actually to have someone talking about this on a more frequent, more intimate, more transparent, more vulnerable environment where people can actually feel safe and not be judged. Because we have this hierarchy and we say this, that sin's okay, but that one, never do that one because that's unforgivable. And when there are some things, and the Bible talks about the different sins, but yet we've all fallen short. Gluttony, eating too much, drunkenness, gambling, all these type of things. Sometimes if someone come up to you and said, you know what, I eat too much. Can you help me? And you say, yeah, I'll help you with that. Someone come up to you and said, I'm dealing with pornography issues. And we go, I don't want to touch that. I don't know enough about that. Because sometimes out of ignorance, we actually don't want to touch the subject. So that's why I'm encouraging you to actually be better informed, have a greater understanding of pornography so you can talk about these areas and create an environment where people actually have 2 or 3 people that they can call on at any time and say, I need to talk. Oh, can you just talk me through it? I am feeling very tempted right now. And we need to role model this as well as leaders. Talk about our things. Because sometimes we actually, at the pulpit, we can actually have this persona that we're all perfect human beings. We need to have a level of transparency when we stuff up, when we don't do so well, when we have our marital conflicts, when we don't do well as a parent, when we do these things that we know that we shouldn't do, and we argue we have road rage and we speed too far and things like that. We should actually be transparent about these things. Now, there is a time and place for everything, but I know that some people who have shared this, pastors who have shared some of their sexual sins of the past, not present, but of the past, it actually gives you some street credibility in saying you are for real. You've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, got the cup, got the mug, got the hat, and I can understand, I can relate to you now. And that's the reason why I talk about some stories when I was 10 years of age and sort of navigating those things. We need to be as focused as possible on areas where young people are. Youth, young adults, married couples, and singles. Singles are an undervalued type of thing. Singles, and in fact, we just did a broadcast on this, 2 broadcasts, in fact, on singleness and valuing singleness and embracing them. And they're in community. They don't have a direct family, but the family is of church in the community is their family quite often. And they need physical touch and they need the intimacy of a hug and an embrace. These are the things that we need to start talking about in a much more relevant way. I could go on a lot more about giving you some statistics and data and neuro pathways, and it's just a fascinating subject. And I find it's real and relevant to most people, but sometimes it's just some practical tools. And I thought, I'll just leave it for now and open it up for some more Q&A. And hopefully I've addressed some questions that you may have, but also to maybe open up some more questions. So we've got the microphone going around, and hopefully I'll be able to help you answer these questions.
Thanks. I was just interested with how pornography affects society generally, whether there's any lobby groups going to government or if there's any movement around the world to, I'd imagine there isn't, but to legislate to say we're going to ban this, just like how we Adventists, we might have a temperance movement about alcohol, that we can stop them producing it. Is there anything like that? Because it just seems like it's destroying
very
society.
Good question. Very good question. In fact, I went to a forum just in Melbourne just about 4 or 5 months ago on that same topic. There was a group of women, about 4 or 5 women in the UK, who wanted to address this very issue. And they got some politicians involved, and they looked at it from not necessarily a moral point of view. They looked at it from a society point of view, and how the destruction of families and the destruction of young people of a distorted imagery of healthy relationships and sexuality. So they got together and they legislated some stuff, and they've actually put filters now on the internet that everyone who signs up for the internet, a new program, a new connection or contract there, thank you very much for helping with that, you have to actually say yes or no to a series of questions, and whether you're allowed to have pornography viewed or naked or violent or different types of things. So it's actually, they're slowly changing the dynamics, and they're actually trying to do that here. Family Voice Australia is actually part of that, and there's also another bit of a movement doing some legislation to try and address that. So it's a slow process, because it's taking away their freedom of right. And, we have to not necessarily do it from a moral point of view. We have to do it from how it could benefit society if we get this right. So it's a good question. You can do some research. I get lots of emails, as you can imagine, from all people wanting a little part of, focus on the family. And but it is something that for the internet providers, the IP people who actually provide the forum and their format, and they're actually doing it from a customer, a corporate citizen aspect. And so they're actually, they can actually advertise, hey, we provide this service. So they actually can encourage more and more people to actually use their provider as a provider because it's actually being filtered. We're never going to stop pornography. I know that sounds like a defeatist attitude, but we can certainly make a dent in it. And I think if we as the church get our act together, that's going to make a serious dent. Because if let's say there's 2 billion Christians in the world, if we make a dent of 1 billion people not watching it, that 50%, that's going to make a huge dent in their bottom line. This multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's supply and demand. And especially with the young people today, they're very justice-orientated, the most justice-orientated ever been in the history of mankind. And they're looking at sexual slavery is bad, pedophilia is bad, and prostitution is bad. And yet pornography feeds all of those areas. And if you make young people aware about sexual trafficking, it makes them just check twice. Should I be watching that? Or should I not be looking at this type of thing? And that's where we're going to see a dent in internet providers actually saying, hey, I'm not getting as much traffic as I used to be because young people aren't looking at it as often. But I think it's a really good question.
Could you tell us or what's the nature of the correlation between pornography and culture? And the second question would be, does a blind person suffer from pornography?
Two excellent questions. I will answer the second one. Can a blind person suffer from pornography? Yes. Because their auditory senses are much more astute and they can listen to things and their imagination in their mind can actually run away with them. There was a thing in the US just recently, and I don't know how it went. They were in Target. It was in Target. And someone, on the PA system, someone actually put in the store a audio of pornography and people making noises. And all these parents are trying to block their kids' ears, and the staff are trying to stop it, and how it happened, no one knows, but because the auditory sound is quite significant. And I'd say a blind person could suffer just as much, if not more, because of their imagination and their auditory senses are much more astute. Your first question about the regard of the culture of pornography and society, it just goes hand in hand. We've actually lowered standards of sexual morality to such a standard that is actually, as I've already said, it's cheapened it and it becomes part of the culture. You would say that most young men, probably in excess of 80+%, will have looked at pornography as a general rule, at least once, or if not twice or 3 times or 4. So how is it pervaded? This pornography has now been, is now normalised in culture, so much so that young people thinking that this is the only way to learn how to do pornography it's just so normalized.
I'm sorry, I meant a correlation between culture. For example, if I come from a particular culture where the idea of shame or nakedness doesn't even exist.
Ah, okay.
And then today, talking of pornography in such a culture doesn't ring a bell.
In which culture?
There are plenty, especially from Africa.
Yep.
Let's say I'm raised in a village where I'm exposed to nudity since I'm 1 year old to the time I'm 12. Nudity is not related or correlated with shame or sin or, other things. So when we talk of pornography, it doesn't ring any bell.
Yeah. Well, there's always going to be extremes. Like you look at those those villages in Amazon, and they never had any contact with, humans outside of their own world, and they would probably not have this issue. It won't be an issue. But there will be other perversions that they might have, such as violence, which is another form of, a depraved, sin aspect, like violence, or how they treat women. But yet I've also seen those same cultures could actually have a very collective, it takes a village to raise a child and that everyone does it together. And so there's some pluses and minuses. But I would say that in our Western culture and then in some of the second and third world cultures that now have access to internet, it has pervaded every aspect of our culture, other than the rare ones about those type of things. Yeah.
Brett, one of the things that we stand by is the whole be in the world but not of the world mentality. And I was reading an article called 12 Signs You're a Modern Day Pharisee that states one of the reasons you would be a modern day Pharisee is that you don't promote fornication, but you are happy to watch movies and entertainment that feature it. And with the onset of a lot of entertainment mediums, movies, TV shows, actually starting to use unsimulated sex as part of their offering, I suppose. How then would you advise ministers, Christians even, to be in the world but not of the world, to be able to relate to their neighbour, to evangelise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Really good question. I'll as I'm unpacking this, it'll make a lot more sense. It can be very subtle, the way that media, because we love media, movies. Who loves movies? We all love movies. And some TV shows start off really good with high morals, and then suddenly it deteriorates into everyone sleeping with everyone. So what starts off really good and really like it, and then it just deteriorates. My favourite TV show is West Wing. It's just it's well written and what have you. But then when you get to about the 6th and 7th episode, then you find them sleeping around, and it's an episode, and you're thinking, what, does it need that? Does it need that? We can be seen as Puritans, and we can see to be very conservative in our nature. We can be seen as being, you can't be serious. You've never watched a violent movie. You've never seen a naked woman. You've never said, and all those type of things. It is almost near impossible to not be sucked into this culture of looking at inappropriate materials. But again, it's a dwelling upon it. We went to a movie once and we simply just walked out. And I contacted the Hoyts or village, I can't remember what it was, and I just said, look, it just wasn't for me, and I'm really sorry. And they sent me free tickets back. They said they respected my stand. And I think that's what we need to be able to make a stand and not accept behaviours. And we need to train up our young people what is appropriate, what's not inappropriate. And not just say, no, but say, what do you think about this? What makes you think when you look at a MA? Because we have different standards. Churches, and I imagine in your family, you have the church standard, then there's the church, your family standard, then there's your neighbour's standard, then there's a school standard. And we have all these areas where it's all a bit confusing for young people, because you go, a 15-year-old and says, I'm going to Tom's house and he's allowed to watch MA movies. Well, that's in Tom's house. But in our house, you're not allowed to watch MA movies. And so I think, as parents, I think we should actually join together and get on the same page. Our school should actually follow the same examples. And so we can be of this world, but we don't have to actually conform to this world. It actually talks about that in the scriptures, that I've already mentioned in Philippians, think and dwell upon these things, is looking at violent or nudity and people sleeping together. Is that pure? Is that of a good report? Is that something that's worth looking at? And challenging our young people and adults for that matter, what are you watching? Because we can justify it very easily. And I'm very easy to turn things off when I don't like something. And I'll be very confident to be able to say that to my kids as well. So it's an ongoing conversation. And I do think the church needs to be relevant, and we need to use different mediums. And I actually think movies are a great way to get movies, using mediums and using movies and clips from movies. That's why I was a kids pastor. I could use Pixar all I liked. But I wouldn't be using violent movies, and I wouldn't be using, sex movies, because it talks about, if you cause someone to stumble, you don't want to cause anyone to stumble. So you might say, it's okay for me to watch a certain style of movie. It doesn't affect me. But if that person hears that you're watching it and they're susceptible, that's a dangerous area. And we have to live it to a higher account. And I don't know if I've given a right answer, but I'm just saying we need to be fully aware we're in this world, but we don't have to partake of everything. But it's tough because it's in our face all the time. But we should give some dialogue to it, not ignore it, not put our head in the sand. And we certainly need to be able to express that to our young people so they can actually stand up for what they believe. And the more that they own their decisions, the more that they actually discern what is right and what is wrong, the better it is for them later on in life. When life gets hard and life gets tough, they'll know what to stand, not just rely on mum and dad, what they think or what the church thinks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just back here. Let's say that us as pastors want to begin the fight against pornography in our community, in our church congregation. How do you go about marketing that in a way that's not awkward and in a way that's not shameful for those who decide to take part? Let's say it's a small group. How do you sort of market a small group to your people without everyone in the congregation or community knowing that whoever's in that group, that person they're broken, they're messed up?
It's a really difficult one. It's a really difficult one because everyone thinks that if I go to that Valiant Man program, does that mean I'm a deviant and I'm a pervert? That's the type of thing. But it should become the culture that, hey, we as a men, we're going to all do it. Everyone's going to do it. So it's all in maybe. That's one option. You shouldn't have to wait for someone to actually have a problem. We should be proactive rather than reactive. But unfortunately, we're behind the ball on this. And so we actually are a bit more reactive. But you need to actually specify when they're coming, this is a safe place, whatever is said here stays here, and really articulate what is going to be taking place. But we as all men, say it's the Valiant Man type of thing, or any other program, or accountability and things like that, this is the new normal, this is our culture, and it doesn't matter if you've got a problem, but you will be able to support others who don't. And it doesn't matter if, that's the type of language that I would use. I don't know if that helps, but I think like that.
I really liked what you said about...
good. Just say that again.
Yeah, I really liked...
Write me letters, write me emails and say how much you liked it.
No, I liked what you said about just talking about things is really important. I came across this statistic that said that homosexuality in various cultures, it occurred at its lowest in the Jewish culture, and it seemed to be because Jewish families were very open about talking about sexuality. And that seemed to have a big impact on that. And so what I wanted to ask you was, how have you gone about talking about, preaching about this in church? Have you done that in such a way that, because it's kind of a tightrope between going in too deep into some topics whilst, being relevant on the other hand. So how do you do that maybe in high schools or in your local church?
Multiple different ways. I like to speak at men's breakfasts, and I speak at, and just getting it out there. And it's amazing that it's like, someone's talking about it because it hasn't been spoken about for a long time. Young people need to hear it, and they're much more open to hearing these type of things. And I do it in a fun, interactive way. And it's interesting when you go into a group of young people and everyone's sitting there, and I try and put them in all in a circle if I had a smaller group, and no one knows where to look. Because I'm going to talk about sex, baby, and then no one knows how to look. And I just sort of deflate and diffuse, and I just say to them, nothing you're going to say is going to embarrass me. Nothing you can say is going to scare me. Nothing you're going to say is off limits. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to address every issue, because a lot of them want to get under your skin and just get a reaction from you. But I am comfortable with who I am in Christ, and I think sex is one part of us, and I'm very open to actually to talk about it. And people appreciate real and transparency and the challenges I have. Like, for example, I share stories. I was engaged, and I kept myself pure for my wedding and my marriage. But I tell you, it was tough. It was really hard. I was tempted numerous times. And I'm going to get married anyway, so can't we just do it? But we were tempted numerous times. But I'm so glad we waited. And that type of story to a young person, for a young man to actually hear it, hey, it is possible. And for a young lady to say, I'm going to aim for the best. But unfortunately, too many of them have succumbed to the pressures. So back to your original question, how do we do it? It's just in our everyday conversation that we talk, and it's a safe place. And we can spiritualize all we like, but we need to have some real and reality in things. Like we can look at all the scriptures, we can look at all sort of, this is what the Bible says, and this is what it says in Hebrew and Greek and all sorts of things, but it all going to come down to God created sex, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, but in the confines of a loving, caring environment. And here are the reasons why, because if you go outside those parameters, it can shrink your brain. That's the other thing that's coming out, that actually shrinks your brain. It actually lowers your own stimulation, and it actually causes you to have dysfunctional, impotence as well. And so they're the things that I think as the church, we can speak into that space, but you need to be well informed. And I wouldn't profess to be an expert. I'm still far from being an expert. And but I'm prepared to do some extra reading on this topic. And the more comfortable and more information, you're empowered to actually speak into people's lives, and at the same time share your own testimonies. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Brett. Look, you've probably touched on this, I think, with that question, but obviously I just took down, we've got to be proactive rather than reactive. Often we're reactive. You've talked that, I think, 10-year-old boys or 12-year-old boys, was it 100% will have looked at pornography?
Yep.
Curiosity kills the cat. At what point do you... Obviously there's a balance between... informing your children and young people and also giving them too much. In your own family, I think you've got three teenage boys. How have you addressed that, particularly with the idea of pornography?
Great question. All my boys have been exposed to pornography at a certain stage in a Christian school by the phone. We had to put other parameters in our place, and they knew it was not the right things to do, but yet they were just attracted to it. I would say the important thing is to, talk about the privacy aspect of our bodies and keeping ourselves protected. Start talking about probably 8 or 9 years of age, but where I just had a phone call. I actually spoke at a conference last week, and a mother who has a 6-year-old daughter, and her daughter, 6 years of age, was highly sexualized, wanting to copy things that she'd seen on on a TV show, the kissing part. That's not normal. And so she was worried that she's been been attacked or assaulted by that Satan. I said, don't jump to conclusions, but we need to have some healthy conversations and appropriate conversations. I always answer back to the question about what I did with my boys. Give it at a late age they want to hear how much they want to know. I use a little bit of a joke about a 6-year-old boy coming up to his dad and saying, Dad, where did I come from? And the dad goes, oh, man, I didn't think I'd have to answer this question as a 6-year-old, but, here goes. And he just blurts it all out. And the kid's going, la, 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 la. And the dad said, well, why did you ask? And he says, well, Tom says he comes from Fitzroy, and Sam says he comes from Beaconsfield. I just want to know where I come from. So the reason that I say that is because it's better to ask the question why they want to know the answer, and clarify the question before you give the answer. So when my boys wanted to talk about these issues, it would be something like, well, how much do you want to know? And they go, well, not as much as you want to give, Dad. But I talk about appropriate looking at and respect for everyone, not only themselves, but for others. And particularly in the area of treating women with respect, and how disrespectful and dishonouring it would be to their mother. In fact, when we caught our boys in this area of pornography, what was more devastating was the reaction that my wife gave at one stage was more upsetting than the actual guilt and shame they were looking at this stuff. So I would be bringing it back to the conversation, the tone of our voice, saying you can tell me anything, there's nothing you can say or share with me that's going to make me love you any less, but this is a safe place and we can talk about these things. So it's an ongoing respect, value, respecting themselves, protecting themselves, knowing what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, and then also asking them the question, how do you think has anyone offered to you any material that you weren't comfortable with? Has anyone shown you anything? What did you say? Don't react, but respond. Oh, I'm really proud of how you responded to that. Or, how did that make you feel? Going with an understanding of a tone, not of reaction, but a loving, caring, grace-filled conversation, and continue to have that ongoing. I say to fathers, be the type of husband that you want your daughter to marry, and the same thing with women. Be the type of mother or the wife that you want your boys to marry. And I think that's the greatest thing we can do. And I would say that in our boys, I'm very demonstrative by nature, and so I show a lot of affection to my wife. You know, holding hands, hugs, kisses, and what have you. And our boys, in fact, I was in the kitchen, and you know, love making starts in the kitchen. Have you heard that? Foreplay starts in the kitchen. And my wife calls me Mr. Octopus. And I was in the kitchen, and I just wanted to, you know, love her a bit. And the boys are in their rooms, and she's trying to beat me off, which is common. And but then I turned around, and there's my son taking photos of my wife and I. It's G-rated. It's not bad. Don't get me wrong. It was G-rated. And then he posted on social media. And he says, my mum and dad being hot and heavy in the kitchen. And we got a few likes. But he said something that was really powerful afterwards. He goes, it makes me smile to see my mum and dad so much in love. And I think that as fathers, as mothers, the best thing we can do for our kids is to love each other wholeheartedly and demonstratively, and to give them, hey, this is the ideal. This is something that you can aim for and create an environment, and they go, you know what, it is possible. And that's the type of conversation. So they can talk about sex, we can talk about relationships, we can talk about dating, all the aspects of life for these kids. And I think that's the way we can do at any age-appropriate level, at whatever the maturity of the young person is. And just fire questions back at them, and that's the best way you can actually approach those things.
Brett, just a couple of reflections. First, I think it dovetails into what George said. Yesterday we explored the fact that we are in a very multicultural environment. So as pastors, as we address our churches, there may be different ways that some cultures within our congregations may address some of this issue. Yeah. I'm just reflecting that, you know, how do I find the best medium? Preaching may not be the best way to talk to that cultural group, but I have to get that conversation going with the various groups within my congregation. Secondly, if parents are still the primary voice, or should be the primary voice, then somehow we have to find tools that we can empower them to be able to get that message across to the young people, because hearing our voice maybe just once a month or once a week, the parents have to echo that, or we have to support what they're teaching the young ones. If 12 and 17 are the target audience for pornography. Yep. Yeah.
So there's reflections or a response?
Reflections.
I'll give you some responses to reflections to your reflections. You're talking about culture, particularly Asian culture is a very much more that they don't talk about sex at all. Like in the Asian culture is predominantly don't talk about it at all. Western culture, we're still a bit uncomfortable with it. I don't know what with the Maori, is it Maori? Polynesian. I don't know what the culture is there, but I'd imagine it's still pretty open. You know, family is very important, but I don't know what details they go to. So there is a cultural aspect that we have to be sensitive to. But if they're living here in our Australian culture, it's gonna come up, and young people are living in this culture. So you might say, well, it's not happening in the Polynesian culture or Asian culture, but your kids are living in this culture. So we need to speak into that culture, and the culture is sex. That is the culture. Pornography is alive and well. Social media and Facebook is alive and well. We need to speak into that culture. We can't use the excuse, well, it's not in our culture, in our national culture. The kids are living in Australia. We need to speak into that language, and we honour, we respect, and we do it sensitively. But it means we still can't just say, well, it doesn't happen in our culture. Well, just because that's the way you've done it doesn't meant to be the way you always do it. Because we're seeing so many people going in with their eyes closed and they're not having any idea about healthy relationships.
It's not the avoidance of it, and it's not the speaking into it because they live in this culture. it's the understanding of the methods that they would use. Let me give you an example. For the Tongans, they would dare not talk about this issue with both male and female in the same room. Now, if you're not aware of that, then you're violating some stuff there that is going to offend them. So having them then separate and talk, and that shows that you're sensitive to the fact that, hey, I understand where you guys come from. I'm aware of that, so I still want to address it because you're in the dominant culture.
Well, you've answered your own question.
Yeah.
Because you have to pick what's appropriate. Like, for example, I got 2 nephews in law. One's from Fiji and the other one's from Solomon Islands. And they don't have anything to do with the mother-in-law. Like, it's just once you get married, the mother-in-law is back seat. And for them to come to our culture here, they've had to do a lot of adjustment to get to know the mother-in-law. Because in their culture, it was considered to be, once you get married, mother-in-law doesn't have anything to do with us. And it was, a steep learning curve. So I would agree, you have to be sensitive. I mean, to do things with male and female in the room, some people go, I don't want to talk about male and female issues, but I'm finding in going to speak into student bodies, you just talk about it, because it's better for them to actually hear the same amount of information as someone who's safe. Again, you have to just be sensitive to your own personal culture, but it's a really good point though. You want to be sensitive to that. So, and respecting and honouring that. But you need to still do it. Females to females, males to males. Very good.
Thank you, Brett. Really enjoyed your presentation, and it's been very helpful. What I just want to know, though, is when we're talking to young people, it's nice to be able to speak to them where you're value-based. These are the values that we hold, because otherwise, if I'm saying something, well, but he's got that view over there, and she's got that view over there. So what makes my view different to anybody else's view? And so all I'm asking really now is that when we look at the Bible, and the Bible asks us to be people of value, to reflect Christ in our lives, what I'd like to know is areas like the 10 Commandments, for example. Thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not commit adultery. These are powerful motivators for people who want to serve and follow the Lord. And I was just wondering how you would use some of those values as you share with others. Yeah. Because, just tying in the Bible with, the reason why we make this stand.
Yeah. Putting things through a filter of biblical worldview, particularly in Christendom, we need to start doing it more. But you can still do values. I can give, a presentation with high Christian content or just high Christian values without using Bible and verse. That's the first comment that I have. I always look at the 10 Commandments as a way, if I was rewriting the Bible, which I'm not, but I would have been saying, thou shalt not commit adultery should have been, thou shalt value your commitment as a married couple. So that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt value human life. Thou shalt not lie, thou shalt always tell the truth. I always put things on a positive rather than a negative, because young people particularly see the Bible as a whole rules of have why nots and nots. Whereas I'm actually, when I speak to young people, I talk about, hey, here is, we have this much freedoms. In it, you can party all you like, you can do everything you like, there's boundaries, but that boundary, as soon as you step out of the boundary, there are going to be consequences. Inside the boundary, you can live a full of freedom and live it to its full. Because and we're from Adam. Adam and Eve said, they could have had all these freedoms. They were all told not to do one thing. Guess what they wanted to do? That one thing they were told not to do. And we're just been perpetuating that throughout the ages. And young people particularly just want to continue to push boundaries. And we need to make sure that those boundaries are safe. As a parent, our boundaries don't move, because the boundaries don't move with God. And so when I talk about values and giving a reason why, the rationale, not just saying that's what we believe in, but here's the reason why. And that's where I come from with regard to values. Hopefully that answers that question.